afternoon, I'm Dilek Tuna. You're watching A News. Now the major stories making headlines today. NATO Secretary-General reiterates unwavering support for Ukraine during a surprise visit to Odessa. Deadly attacks on camps in North Darfur have forced tens of thousands to flee as Sudan's conflict sparks a deepening humanitarian crisis. Indigenous rights activists convened at the United Nations headquarters to press for greater international recognition for anti-colonial independence movements. NATO Secretary-General Mark Rutte reaffirms the security alliance's continued support for Ukraine. He made the announcement when he visited the port city of Odessa on Tuesday after several Russian missile strikes this week, particularly on the town of Sumy, which killed more than 35 people.
Visiting Ukrainian soldiers in hospital, NATO Secretary-General Mark Rutte has reaffirmed unwavering support for Ukraine. He visited the port city of Odessa on Tuesday alongside President Volodymyr Zelensky. The trip comes in the wake of Russian missile strikes on Sumy that killed 35 people and injured more than 100. He says that the North Atlantic Treaty Organization will continue to stand by the country.
Indeed, today we again spoke about the important talks that President Trump is leading with Ukraine as well as with Russia to try to end the war and secure a durable peace. These discussions are not easy, not least in the wake of this horrific violence. But we all support President Trump's push for peace. Other allies, including through efforts led by France and the United Kingdom, are ready, willing and able to shoulder more responsibility in helping to secure peace when the time comes.
President Zelensky says international efforts to ensure maritime security are taking place on Wednesday in Turkey. He says they're focused on long-term Black Sea security and post-ceasefire guarantees, not immediate peace negotiations.
A meeting of the military on the issue of security in the Black Sea is happening in Turkey. This concerns primarily the coalition of the willing, the corresponding steps. As we said, there are already enough such meetings. Various formats of the coalition of the willing and able are being discussed. Regarding security in the Black Sea today, it is being discussed during these 2 days at the site of our Turkish colleagues. This is not about ending the war, unfortunately. This is about what will happen after the ceasefire. Regarding territories, Ukraine is a sovereign state and all territories belong to the unitary state of Ukraine. Therefore, again, only the people of Ukraine can speak about the territories of our state.
After the visit, President Zelensky urgently called for enhanced air defense systems, particularly US-made Patriot missiles, saying Kyiv is ready to buy them.
Ukrainian authorities say that Russia launched a drone attack overnight on the Black Sea port city of Odessa, injuring 3 people and sparking fires. Local officials say residential buildings, warehouses and civilian infrastructure were damaged. The full scale of the attack remains unclear, but several areas of the city were left with visible destruction. There was no immediate comment from Russia. It's despite previous agreements aimed at limiting attacks over the Black Sea region. Both sides have accused each other of violating previous deals. The EU's sanctions on Russia are up for renewal in July, but there is concern in Brussels over Hungary's potential veto. EU officials are looking for ways to get around a possible no from Budapest. Pablo Gutierrez brings more from Brussels.
Every 6 months since the war in Ukraine began, the EU votes on whether to maintain its sanctions on Russia. In July, the latest deadline arrives, and once again, Hungary has signaled it may say no. The Hungarian government has been critical of the sanctions on Moscow since they were first imposed. Budapest threatened to withhold approval during the last 2 renewals, but then agreed to vote in favor after obtaining concessions from the the EU. But for this 17th round of sanctions, Brussels is worried it won't be so easy this time. Sanctions come in two parts: bans on Russian goods like gas and steel, and a list of more than 2,500 Russians banned from the European Union. All 27 countries need to agree to extend both. Legal experts here in Brussels say there is a possible way to get the sanctions in place, even if Hungary vetoes them. EU officials say there is a loophole that may allow the current package of sanctions to remain in place without the need to get them approved by all EU member states. Another option is to offer Hungary a deal, for example, agreeing not to impose new sanctions, rather only propose an extension of the current restrictions on Russia, or even replace the current sanctions with higher tariffs on Russian products. There is also the controversial option of stripping Hungary of its voting rights in the European Council if it refuses to support the EU's pressure campaign on Moscow. All of this comes as the EU continues and hopes to bring the Ukraine into the EU, give it EU membership. Another move Hungary might block. Pablo Gutierrez for A News in Brussels.
And now to Tehran. The second round of talks between Iran and the US will take place in Muscat, the capital of Oman, this Saturday. They'll be continuing their efforts to come to an agreement over scaling back Iran's nuclear program.
The second round of negotiations between Iranian and US officials will be held this Saturday in the Omani capital, Muscat, as they will discuss an agreement over Iran's nuclear program. Iran has said that it wants removal of US sanctions over its nuclear program, and United States wants Iran to scale down its program. In the meantime, both delegates which held the first round of negotiations last Saturday in Oman said that the talks which were held indirectly were positive and constructive. Iranian Foreign Ministry spokesman Ismail Baghai told a weekly press conference on Monday that Iran's #1 objective is the removal of sanctions. In the meantime, Iranian Foreign Ministry has announced that head of the IAEA, International Atomic Energy Agency, Rafael Grossi, is expected to travel to Tehran soon. Mr. Grossi is reportedly planned to visit Iran Wednesday afternoon, few days before the second round of talks in the Omani capital. Also, Mr. Abbas Araghchi, Iran's foreign minister, is expected to travel to Moscow in order to negotiate a range of issues, bilateral issues, as well as the upcoming negotiations between Iran and US officials. Although no major agreement is expected to be reached during these round of talks, it seems that both Iran and the United States want a minimal agreement, first as an achievement for both sides, and second, to test the intentions of the other side to see whether they can reach a larger agreement on possible normalization of ties in their 47 years of strained relations between Tehran and Washington. Turad Shiralilu reporting for A News TV, Tehran.
White House Special Envoy Steve Witkoff says progress on a nuclear agreement with Iran will hinge on verifying its uranium enrichment and weapons programs. He told Fox News that key issues include Iran's missile stockpile and bomb trigger capabilities. However, Tehran has long denied seeking nuclear weapons. These comments come as a second round of nuclear talks will be held in Muscat this Saturday.
The president means what he says, which is they cannot have a bomb. The conversation with the Iranians will be much about two critical points. One, enrichment. As you mentioned, they do not need to enrich past 3.67%. In some circumstances, they're at 60%. In other circumstances, 20%. That cannot be. And you do not need to run, as they claim, a civil nuclear program where you're enriching past 3.67%. So This is going to be much about verification on the enrichment program, and then ultimately verification on weaponization. That includes missiles, the type of missiles that they have stockpiled there, and it includes the trigger for a bomb. And I think we're here to have, as the president indicated, and I take my direction from him every day that I go to work, we're here to see if we can solve this situation diplomatically and with dialogue.
Wall Street cheered, but not for long. A speech that once promised growth and fortune has since set off market turmoil. US President Donald Trump's sweeping tariffs have jolted the very financial titans who applauded him just weeks ago. And now they're scrambling.
Welcome to the third edition of the FII Priority Summit in Miami. This year, we're starting with an exceptional session.
Wall Street's biggest names filled the Miami Beach Conference Hall. They had to come to hear US President Donald Trump outline what sounded like a new age of prosperity. Executives from BlackRock, Apollo, JP Morgan and Vista Equity cheered as he promised a box full of ambitions: wealth, growth, transformation. But just weeks later, that future-brimming box cracked open, and what spilled out triggered panic. The sound of applause from America's financial elite faded. Hands once raised in celebration scrambled to respond to a full-blown trade war that Trump has ignited. On 2 April, he launched a sweeping tariff program, rattling markets. The S&P 500 shed more than $5 trillion in value in just 2 days. Bond markets buckled. Foreign capital began flowing out. Retailers like Walmart slashed their forecasts. Wall Street's optimism turned to unease. Trump had long threatened reciprocal tariffs. Few expected him to go this far. His team insisted the policy was about fairness. Critics, even within his former circle, called it retribution. This term is different. Gone are the Wall Street confidants with open White House access. In their place stands a closed circle, with Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent declaring MAGA doesn't stand for Make M&A Great Again. Business leaders now see it clearly. Trump's economic revolution isn't built for them. It's built for the heartland, not the high-rises. Billionaires like Bill Ackman and Dan Loeb have spoken out. Few have the president's ear. Even Trump's allies misjudged him. They never took him seriously, one confidant told the Financial Times. He remembers who stood with him and who didn't. When the market chaos hit its peak, Trump blinked. On 9 April, he delayed full implementation of the tariffs, not because of pressure from donors, but because the signs were unmistakable. Bond market distress, a faltering dollar, private equity on edge. For Wall Street, it was a jolt. Trump may speak the language of business, but he is not their president. As one investor put it, we are betting on a Super Bowl where we don't know the teams or the rules. The revolution is underway, Trump says. Markets will just have to keep up.
China's President Xi Jinping defended free trade, presenting China as a key source of regional stability and certainty amid tensions with the latest US tariff hikes. He made the announcement during his Southeast Asia tour, aimed at strengthening regional cooperation and deepening economic ties.
Chinese President Xi Jinping arrived in Kuala Lumpur in Malaysia on Tuesday. He was warmly welcomed by Malaysia's Prime Minister Anwar Ibrahim at Kuala Lumpur International Airport. It's part of his 5-day visit to Southeast Asia this week. China is already carrying out several projects under the Belt and Road Initiative with Malaysia, including the largest, which is an $11.2 billion railway. China is also Malaysia's largest trading partner. On Monday, he was in Vietnam, where he defended free trade, presenting China as a key source of regional stability and certainty. Xi held talks with Vietnamese Communist Party General Secretary To Lam, where they focused talks on strengthening economic cooperation between both nations. 45 agreements were signed between the two countries on supply chains and railway projects. China also promised to create broader opportunities for the export of Vietnamese agricultural products to the Chinese market. However, the South China Sea issue continues to create tensions between China and both Vietnam and Malaysia. The meeting in Hanoi came just days after US President Donald Trump imposed new tariffs that shook global markets. Trump accused China and Vietnam of trying to mess with the United States. Xi Jinping's visit holds strategic significance for China in terms of strengthening its position in the region. Amid the impact of the US tax hikes, Beijing has seized the opportunity to present itself as a responsible superpower. After visiting Malaysia, Xi will fly to Cambodia.
To Africa now. Deadly attacks on campus in North Darfur have forced tens of thousands to flee as Sudan's conflict sparks a deepening humanitarian crisis.
Tens of thousands have fled Sudan's Zamzam and Abu Shouk displacement camps in North Darfur after deadly attacks, the UN reports. The attacks, reportedly carried out by opposition forces and allied militias, have resulted in the deaths of hundreds of civilians and aid workers.
We are estimating that more than 80,000 has already fled the camp, and the numbers are really increasing every day.
The conflict, which began in April 2023 between the Sudanese army and the paramilitary Rapid Support Forces, has been marked by ethnic violence, mass killings, and the systematic use of sexual violence. Survivors have reported horrific accounts of rape and abuse, often perpetrated in front of family members. Despite the ongoing violence, there are signs that displaced populations are eager to return to areas recently recaptured by the army, including parts of Khartoum and Al Jazeera state.
We are going to face a challenge, but it's also, I think, an opportunity in supporting the return of what we estimate it could be about 3 million people, maybe to the capital, and maybe even 4 million in other, 3 to 4 million considering other regions. That the population now consider to be safe.
Sudan now faces the world's worst displacement and humanitarian crisis, with millions affected and aid efforts increasingly hampered by insecurity and lack of access.
Indigenous rights activists from around the world convened at the United Nations headquarters to press for greater international recognition for anti-colonial independence movements. Our correspondent, Obey Shah Bandar, has this report from New York.
Human rights defenders and indigenous rights activists from the Pacific to the Caribbean gathered on Tuesday at the United Nations headquarters in New York to raise their collective voices on an international stage.
Let us reclaim our identity with pride and purpose. Ubuntu.
Organized by the Baku Iniative Group, an international non-governmental organization dedicated to empowering indigenous rights activists, the conference, titled Decolonization, Silent Revolution, offered a unique forum for the human rights defenders and the indigenous activists to work together and learn from each other in their struggle against colonial oppression. Vero, a Kanak indigenous rights activist from the remote Pacific island of New Caledonia, came to the UN to highlight his people's struggle.
It's my life to fight for my people and my country.
The French government, which still to this day controls New Caledonia, launched a violent military crackdown against indigenous Kanak activists last year.
We want the freedom for all the people around the world, so that's how we work together to protect the human rights and indigenous rights. And today it was a good opportunity with the international conference organized by the Azerbaijan and the Baku Iniative Group, and I would like to say thank you.
Meanwhile, the Baku Iniative Group has held a series of conferences to amplify the struggle for indigenous rights, particularly those of the Kanak people in New Caledonia.
In the next several years, we will see Kanak people very independent. The Baku Iniative Group supports fair struggle and only against colonialism and neocolonialism under the international law.
Indigenous rights activists seeking independence face an uphill struggle. The Kanak people of New Caledonia cannot hope to match the military might of the colonial French armed forces. But the activists that gathered here at the UN with the Baku Iniative Group were confident that one day they will prevail. How do you say in French, free New Caledonia, en français?
Vive l'indépendance de la Kanaki Nouvelle-Calédonie.
Ube Shabander, New York, A News.
A planned EU military aid package to Armenia has stirred tensions as Hungary pushes for equal treatment of Azerbaijan. The standoff underscores deeper divisions over how Brussels engages with the South Caucasus.
Hungary has blocked a €10 million military aid package intended for Armenia under the European Peace Facility, EPF. The aid, composed of non-lethal military assistance, was aimed at equipping a battalion-level field camp in Armenia. The EPF, launched in 2021, is the European Union's primary tool for financing military support outside the bloc. While most of its funds have so far gone to Ukraine, the 2024 package marks the first instance of the EU extending EPF military aid to Armenia and Azerbaijan. However, Hungary has withheld its approval for 6 weeks, reportedly demanding that Azerbaijan be included in the discussions and receive a matching aid package. According to diplomatic sources, Budapest insisted that Baku be granted €10 million in support for demining operations as a precondition for lifting its veto. Efforts to resolve the deadlock continued as recently as Monday, but sources said that negotiations failed to produce a breakthrough. Hungary's stance reflects its close ties with Azerbaijan and its push for a more balanced EU approach in the South Caucasus region.
In Kazakhstan, Astana is hosting the second Central Asian Media Forum, drawing more than 700 participants and over 30 international experts from across the region. The two-day event will focus on digital transformation, the impact of social media on national branding, and the future of collaboration. Our correspondent, Fariza Karimurzuna, has the story from the capital.
Central Asian countries are taking steps toward closer media cooperation with plans to launch a joint TV channel and media platform. The announcement came today from Kazakhstan's Minister of Culture and Information, Aida Balayeva, during the second Central Asian Media Forum here in Astana. Balayeva highlighted the need for large-scale projects that can bring the region's media space together. Among the proposals, a Central Asian Journalism Academy and a creative hub to support the industry. A big focus today was on digital innovation, including the impact on artificial intelligence and big data on the media landscape and how social media is shaping public opinion and national identity. One issue that sparked serious discussion, the spread of misinformation online. Participants agreed stronger regulation is urgently needed. Uzbekistan's media chief Asadjon Kodjayev also spoke, saying it's time for the region to push forward with joint media initiatives and build a shared digital space. He called it not just an economic move, but a strategic one. Kazakhstan also announced its strengthening ties with Chinese broadcaster CGTN and revealed that Al Jazeera will soon open a bureau here. It's a clear signal that cross-border media partnerships in the region are gaining momentum. Well, the forum continues tomorrow with a series of workshops for journalists from across the region. We will be following it closely and bringing you the latest in our upcoming reports.
Georgia's President Mikhail Kavalashvili is in Baku for an official visit, meeting with Azerbaijani President Ilham Aliyev. The two leaders held one-on-one talks and issued joint statements highlighting their strategic partnership. From energy exports to transport links, they stressed the vital role both countries play in Europe's energy security and the future of the South Caucasus. Let's now bring in our guest to unpack the significance of this visit and the bilateral relations. Valerie Chechelashvili, Georgian Strategic Analysis Centre board member and ambassador, is joining us from Tbilisi. Valerie, thanks for joining the programme.
Thank you for having me.
Now, how significant are Azerbaijan-Georgia relations for regional stability and cooperation, particularly in energy and connectivity?
Well, it's difficult to overestimate the significance of Azerbaijani-Georgian relationship in bilateral format and also for the regional stability and security. I call this relationship a positive interdependence relationship, which are based on the century-long friendly traditional relations between Azerbaijan and Georgian people, plus on a very pragmatic interest, because Georgia provides the outreach for Azerbaijani energy resources to the international markets, and Azerbaijan is contributing to the energy security of Georgia. Our trade relationship are also developing well, although I have to mention that last year it decreased for $200 million, which should be a matter of concern for governments.
Okay, and with Moscow sending cautious signals about re-engaging diplomatically and Georgia maintaining its position over occupied territories, what direction do you foresee for Georgia's foreign policy in the near future, and how could it impact the region?
Well, Russians, it's traditional rhetoric of Russians, which is enshrined also in their foreign strategy document, saying that Georgia should accept new realities in the region, meaning we have to recognize the independence of Abkhazia and Tskhin Valley region, and then everything will be fine. Nothing will be fine until Russia will not call back the recognition of so-called Abkhazia and Tskhin Valley region, and Russians know that very well. I think that even Georgian Dream understands this reality.
Okay, Valerie, it was a pleasure talking to you. Thanks for your contribution.
You're welcome.
Now, the Taliban have stepped up diplomacy, meeting with officials around the world to discuss trade and regional cooperation. Tamim Bahis has more on this engagement.
In recent weeks, the Taliban-led authorities in Afghanistan have intensified diplomatic activity with regional and international actors. High-level visits to Kabul included a senior Iranian delegation aiming to boost trade ties, a Russian ambassador discussing economic cooperation, and officials from Kazakhstan exploring strategic partnerships. Afghanistan's de facto foreign minister also made recent visits to Saudi Arabia and Oman to enhance bilateral relations, while a representative from the Afghan Red Crescent attended a polio eradication conference in Qatar, urging global support. These engagements reflect a growing trend of normalization. Despite initial uncertainty following the Taliban's return to power over 3 years ago, countries like Russia, China, Iran, the UAE and others are now actively engaging with Kabul on trade and regional cooperation. Notably, with the election of US President Donald Trump, there have been some visible developments in US Taliban engagements. The Taliban's release of US prisoners as a goodwill gesture, the rare visit by high-level US delegation to Kabul, and the removal of bounties on Taliban leaders are all signals of a changing dynamic. Afghanistan has also expanded ties with neighbors such as Uzbekistan, Turkmenistan, Kyrgyzstan, and others, developments that mark a significant shift in the Taliban's foreign relations, once thought unlikely. This is Tamim Bahis in Kabul for A News.
Turkey says it's firm on Syria as tensions increase. President Recep Tayyip Erdogan has issued a new warning to those who oppose peace and stability in the war-torn country. He says that Ankara will not allow any move to redraw Syria's map.
Milletimin President
Recep Tayyip Erdogan addressed the nation on Monday night following a cabinet meeting in Ankara, drawing red lines over Syria's future. Held at the presidential complex, the meeting came amid renewed talk of an autonomous corridor in northern Syria, a concept Turkey views as a direct threat. Without naming names, Erdogan signaled firm opposition to any effort to redraw Syria's map under the guise of peacekeeping. The warning followed what Erdogan called a turning point in Syria, the events of December 8, when power shifted among opposition groups with Turkey's support. Since then, Ankara has argued that a new era has begun, one that must be recognized by both allies and rivals. Referencing past military campaigns that dismantled a so-called terror corridor, Erdogan said Turkey would resist any new partition efforts, even those with international backing. His message also targeted outside actors.
Kimse hatalı hesap yapmamalı. Kışkırtmalar karşısındaki
No one should make miscalculations. Our calm and composed stance in the face of provocations must never be perceived as a weakness. Especially on the issue of Syria, certain actors should value Turkey's friendship rather than test the limits of our patience, and accordingly adjust their rhetoric and policies. They should act like a state, not like an organization.
Örgüt gibi değil, devlet gibi hareket etmelidir.
While the cabinet had been expected to focus on domestic reforms, the tone shifted amid reports of cross-border movements near Syria's northeast. Ankara appears readying for regional engagement on its own terms.
Soaring above ancient valleys and surreal landscapes, hot air balloon tourism in Turkey has quite literally reached new heights. Last year, there were more than 43,000 flights carrying nearly 100,000 passengers floating across 7 regions. It marks the highest number of this type of trip in the country.
Nearly 100,000 tourists took to the skies over Turkey last year, floating across 7 prominent regions. Hot air balloon tourism has soared by 25% more than the previous year. It marks the highest number in the nation's history. In total, 43,000 balloon flights were carried out in 2024, operated by 71 licensed companies and a fleet of more than 440 balloons. They travel over beautiful valleys such as the Cappadocia region, which is famous for its fairy tale landscapes and sunrises, and remains at the heart of this aerial adventure. Other areas feature the wide travertines of Pamukkale in Denizli, the serene Soğanlı Valley in Kayseri, Antalya's historic Aspendos, the breathtaking Ihlara Valley in Aksaray, and the ancient Phrygian Valley in Afyonkarahisar. The country has also started producing its own hot air balloons and exporting them to Rwanda, Ghana, Egypt, Azerbaijan, Qatar, South Korea, Japan, Mexico, and Jordan. By the end of last year, Turkey had more than 380 licensed balloon pilots and 710 technical personnel, reflecting an 8.5% increase from the previous year.
That's all for now. Keep watching A News for all the latest updates.